It's good to see you all tonight. Continuing our classes on evidences, class on evidences. So the first class we talked kind of a little bit broader about the nature of evidences, right? This kind of relationship between evidence and faith and free will, and kind of tried to put evidence where it kind of contextualize the class a little bit for us, like what it can provide and what it can't provide, right? And I think that class in particular is helpful as we get into our material for tonight. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But then last week we also talked a little bit, not directly on evidences itself, but kind of the nature of our faith that we have, right? And we talked specifically about the consequences of our faith. So generally speaking, you believe in something, well, what does that imply? What is the result of that? And so from that regard, you consider what we believe as Christians and the implications of what we believe as Christians, and that helps shape our faith and the consequences of our faith. But I do think that provides some sort of evidence for why we believe what we believe, right? It provides this, it does this sort of thing. So tonight, we're going to talk particularly about evidences from nature, creation, the world, those sorts of things. And like I said, I think it's helpful when we look at this study tonight, and even next week a little bit, but particularly, looking at some of these evidences we're going to look at in the class from creation and those things to understand what it provides for us, like how it's helpful. I don't know, and of course you can argue about this however you want to, but I don't know that a lot of the arguments we're going to talk about tonight are winning arguments for people who are atheists or don't believe. I think the real value of tonight is in faith building for us, and in faith building for people who have some interest or understanding of God. I think that the conversations about trying to argue with or convince somebody from evidences to believe in God is a different conversation than really what we're having tonight. So I want to make that clear. At least that's the way that I approached, the way that I outlined this information tonight. And that isn't to say that it wouldn't be helpful to somebody who doesn't believe in God. I think it's helpful to kind of categorize that, because we think evidences and we think, oh, we're getting ready to go to war with somebody. And that's not really the approach that I have with this material. Sure, maybe it's helpful. If it is, use that, great. But I also think it's helpful for us specifically to build our faith. And that's kind of the approach that I have with this tonight. So hopefully that's fair. It makes sense. And so tonight we're going to look at particularly some evidences from nature. Before we do so, though, let's go ahead and begin with a word of prayer. If you'll pray with me, please. God, our Father in heaven, we thank you so very much for the chance to be here tonight. We're grateful for this time to be with one another, to build each other up to love and good works, and to study from your word. We pray that you'll be with us tonight, as always, that you'll give us insight into your word, wisdom, understanding. Help us to understand truth, Father, and we pray that we can see you better, and that this class can be something that builds our faith. We pray that as we build our faith, as we strengthen ourselves from your word, and as we build each other up, that it can be something that emboldens us, strengthens us, and better allows us to shine your light in the world around about us. We pray that you'll help this to be fruitful, and that you'll help us to be fruitful in your kingdom. We pray that your kingdom will grow, and it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. So here's one of the things about God, Christianity, right? He's invisible. I think we'd say that God is invisible. He's not a person. He's not a king. And in fact, that's like one of the major tenets of the old law, right? No graven images. You don't create an image of God. He is unseen. He is invisible, all those things. And so because of that, we are in the position of faithfully believing in a God that we don't see. Might be a way that we look at that. However, one, you could argue Jesus is the image of God, that we saw God in Jesus, and so he was seen that way. But I also think that it's really interesting, the argument that Paul makes in Romans chapter 1. If you turn to Romans chapter 1, he says this here in chapter 1, verse 19. Romans 1:19. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. It's interesting, isn't it? God's invisible. We don't make images of God. And yet, Paul is arguing what? That he's clearly been seen from the beginning. Now, I made the case that I don't know that this is a class tonight is primarily for trying to convince people who don't believe in God to believe in God. That's different from saying that they have an excuse to not believe in God. That's clearly contrary to what Paul is saying here, and I think contrary to the nature of the world and the way that God has created it. He has made himself apparent. Now, some people are willful and disobedient to God and deny his existence, and we'll talk about some of that as we go. But that isn't to say that you're going to convince them by saying, well, look at nature. Would for some people, might not for others. But what's interesting is here, he mentions a couple things about God. He says, what is known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. His invisible attributes. What are his invisible attributes that he lists here that are plain to them, that they can see? Yeah, his divine power. And then what's the other one? Or sorry, she said both of them, and I combined. Eternal power and divine nature. Sorry, that's why you all were confused. Yeah, so divine nature and his eternal power. And so I want to start by talking about those two things, particularly in how they are seen in the world, how they're seen in creation. And to do so, I want to turn to Psalm 19, and I want us to begin here and kind of look at Psalm 19 at the beginning of the class and kind of extract some of the lessons from this psalm. So we'll read these 10 verses. Psalm 19, verse 1. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. Their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them he has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom leaving his chamber, and like a strong man runs its course with joy. Its rising is from the end of the heavens, and its circuit to the end of them, and there is nothing hidden from its heat. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandments of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eye. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The rules of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More desired are they than gold, even much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey and drippings of the honeycomb. So, particularly the first part of this psalm here uses the world itself as a testament to the eternal power of God. In what way does the world provide a testament to God's eternal power? Because you could look at either one of those words, right? Either the eternal nature of his power or the power itself. But in either case, what things in nature, in the world, declare those things? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the size, the magnitude, the vast expanse, right? It's amazing, you look at how big the stars and the galaxies and all those things. I don't know much about it, but I know that it's big. I know that it's overwhelming, which might be why I'm not particularly interested in it, because it's too big. I'm not going to understand it, right? But we have a fascination with those things and exploring those things, and it speaks to God in that way. Yeah, I think so. What else? And what other ways? Yeah, Brett. Yeah, there's something that is captivating, that is incredible about some of the vistas you can see from a mountaintop or from the Grand Canyon or from a hillside or a beautiful valley or just different places. The sun rising over the ocean, right? Like these things that we see are incredible. There's a beauty about them, something incredible that I think that speaks to us. Yeah.
Scientists would like to tell you all that was created by accident, but it screams intelligent design every single time you look at birth, every time you look at death, every time you look at the four seasons of the year, every time you look at this repetitive thing that we refer to as life taking place in front of us. And it doesn't matter if you're looking at it from this macro level of being extremely large, or if you're looking at it microscopically at the simplest of organisms. Everything has the same cycle that it works with. Everything has a need and it provides a want. It's coexistence. It's symbiotic nature. And all of this works together, and it's not by accident.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And this cohesion all the way through from the macro to the micro, the big to the little, shows an order that exists. There's all sorts of ways that people try to characterize the world, to try and make sense of it. My kids like Disney movies, the circle of life, that there's like this beauty to the circle of life. And of course, it's a little bit silly. We watched the Mufasa movie or whatever, right? And here's Mufasa, and he goes to this new wonderful land, and he's the great king, and everything's wonderful, and all the animals love him. But it was obvious to me throughout the entire movie that despite the fact that the lions were hungry, they never ate a single animal, right? They try to make it this Disney version of it, right? Because it's this beautiful thing. And the reason why they get away with it is because we recognize that there is this order to things, right? The lions eat the deer, then they die and they become the grass, the deer eat the grass, whatever sort of thing. And there's this symbiotic nature to the world, this order to the way that God has created things. And whether it's something like that or microbiology, right? And the way that cells interact with one another or whatever it is, there's this kind of beautiful order to things that exist. And I think that's exactly right. It speaks to design, it speaks to power. What speaks to the eternal power of God in nature, do you think? What's a sign you can point to that says eternity, ongoing, forever, right? Because all those things speak to power. But what speaks to eternal power, do you think? When was the last time the sun didn't rise? We like to science it all out, right? Well, the earth is spinning around the sun, and it's also spinning on its axis, and that allows the sunrise and the sunset and the seasons, and it's we understand it all, right? We can make the little science fair projects and spin the planets around the sun, and we get it. We understand it. And somehow, because we can understand it, people would like to think that robs it of its power. But it's almost the exact opposite, right? Why is the sun burning? Why does it not burn out? Why hasn't it burned out yet? Right? Can we explain all the intricacies of why we haven't flown off our axis, or why these things are the exact way that they are, or why planets exist at all, or why there's ever a sun, or there's this thing that exists in the world that is so fundamental to our daily lives that is eternal. The sun rises and it sets every single day. And if you tomorrow got to sunrise and the sun wasn't coming up, you'd say, oh, it's cloudy. And you look, you're like, oh, it's not cloudy. And what would happen? What sort of chaos would ensue? We go without power for 2 days because of a hurricane, and people are beating each other up in line for a gas station, right? Just to get a little gas. It's the world falls apart quickly. Right? COVID happens, and then there's riots, and next thing you know, buildings are burning down across the country. And it's not by people who are rioting because they're mad at something. It's people who are oh, there's no law, I'm going to take what I want. And the society collapses almost instantaneously. Like, it does not take much for the world to fall apart. And yet every day the sun rises, right? And the sun sets. And it's this incredible testament to the eternal power of God. And like, give them the millions and billions of years they think the earth was alive. That just speaks even more to the eternal power of God, that the sun is still rotating around the earth. I mean, it's incredible to think about the continuous nature of God, right? His continuous control, something that has existed for forever. Yeah. Yeah, there's this renewal within the earth and the existence that just speaks to the character of God as well. Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. There's another hand over here. Yeah.
You can go back year after year after year, and that water's still flowing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's this continuous nature. And it's interesting when you look particularly at this Psalm 19, it talks about day to day pours out speech, night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor their words whose voice is not heard. The voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them he has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom leaving his chamber, and like a strong man runs its course with joy. Its rising is from the end of the heavens, and its circuit to the end of them, and there's nothing hidden from its heat. There's a couple kind of funny analogies in there, right? Like a bridegroom coming out of his tent. I don't know that I would write that into a sermon if I was going to preach that on a Sunday, but it's here in the Word, right? David felt like that was an appropriate analogy. The sun rising in the morning, this like glorious glow of a bridegroom coming out of his tent in the morning, right? Like there's something powerful about it, right? There's something magnificent, joyous, buoyant about it. I don't know what kind of adjective you want to use, but the sun rising in the morning. And it's also fascinating as well that he talks about these things are speech. They are declaring. They are proclaiming. There's a voice to them. There's a sound to them. God is speaking through these things, right? And as the sun rises and it comes over the world and it sets and it comes back around, there's this constant, powerful sort of thing about it, right? And we love sunrises and we love sunsets, right? Like we love the beautiful colors and we love the sentimentality of the moment, right? The peacefulness of the sunrise and like the relaxing nature of a sunset after a long day, you know? It's a beautiful thing. And all of these things are characteristic of God. But notice what he says here too. It's rising from the end of the heavens, its circuit to the end of them, and there's nothing hidden from its heat. I mean, there's two ways to read that, right? Heat could be a negative thing, like it's some sort of judgment or something, but I don't think that really fits the context. The idea is rather, it touches everything. The power of the sun, it touches it all. The heat of the sun, it exists all over everything. And there's something that's magnificent about that, yeah.
Wherever you are on planet Earth, these evidences are evident to you. They're available, and it doesn't matter what language you speak or the people around you. The natural world declares something that everyone can recognize. It's awesome. It doesn't tell us the plan of salvation or the items of worship or qualifications for elders. We don't know that, but we know something.
Right. And we know that his eternal power, right? Like there is something, right, that is there. And I think that's exactly right. And I like what you said about language too, because we're using voice, we're using speech here as the metaphor, but it's not speech in some foreign tongue, right, that you can't understand, where you're trying to figure out how to communicate with somebody. It is rather the universal speech of creation itself that is speaking to the character of God. It's pretty incredible, isn't it? But it's also interesting when you look at some of this. He kind of continues on to talk about the law at the end of this as well. And there's this interesting connection that he makes, because it's almost like there's two psalms here. In fact, I mean, you read enough, scholarship, you'll find somebody who says anything, and some will try and argue that really these probably should be two separate psalms and try to, I don't know why. But you have this section here on creation, declaring God, and then you have this other section that deals with the law, right? The Lord's teaching is perfect, restoring life, it's steadfast, his precepts are upright, all these things. What do you think the connection, assuming that the Bible isn't haphazardly thrown together, why do you think these two parts of this psalm are connected here? The beauty of the law and the beauty of nature. Order. You want to elaborate on that? What do you mean?
Well, we talked about the rising of the sun, the setting of the sun, the moon, and the earth revolves around. The whole order of everything is consistent. And then we come to God's law, in the order in which it's in. There's a reason why it's in the order that it's in. It helps us understand the nature of God, his expectations for us. It all goes together. It fits together like a puzzle.
Yeah, and I think that this really becomes a good transition point to the second thing in Romans 1, right? It was his eternal power and his what? His divine nature. So we see his power, his eternal power, but we also see his very character. And so just like the earth speaks to this power, the law speaks to the character of God as well, right? It is a reflection of that. If you were to read through the old law, and maybe this is a tricky question, what sorts of things does God care about in the Mosaic law? Specifically the Mosaic law, not just the Torah as a whole, right? But what sorts of laws, if you're going to kind of divide them up? I don't know how well you all know the law. Maybe it's an unfair question, but yeah. Yeah, so you get like the purity laws, right, that deal with sacrifices and cleansings and all those things. The Levitical law is a big part of that, right? You get all the different sacrifices, the peace offerings, the burnt offerings, the sin offerings, all those things. And those deal primarily with this relationship with God. What other sorts of things? Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot that deals with your view of community and neighbor and how you treat other people, right? And so, like, we say eye for an eye, and sometimes that gets like a bad rap, right? Like, that's a lot. But really, it's a limit, right? It's a cap on it. You cannot take more from somebody else than they have done to you. In a world that is much more punitive, right? It is a way of saying you do not do something unjust. If they take it, then you can only take back what they have done, right? I think that's the right way to frame that. So there's a lot that deals with your neighbors, right? And then as a part of that, you get like the Ruth law, right? Where you leave the edges of your field for the widows and the poor to come and glean. You get these things that are considered others, about putting a parapet up on the roof of your house, because if somebody falls off, you're liable, because you should be thinking about other people and protecting them and being considerate of those things. Like all those things about people. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's at the heart of it, right? Justice, kindness, walk humbly with your God. And as a part of that too, he talks about the foreigner amongst them. There's a lot of laws in the Mosaic law about how you treat the foreigners that come into your land. And basically you treat them with respect and decency, if you want to summarize it. And so the whole thing is this view and perspective of how you care for people and treat with them, and its limits and its consequence, right? And we like to look at that part of it, because that's what we think of when we think of law. But it's all organized in such a way as to create a society and a people that can actually live with one another with respect and reverence, right? And at the heart of it is kindness and love. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and might, right? And the second is just like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's the law. And those very things, then, are connected to what we see in the way that God has created the world. That his eternal power and the way that the sun rises and the way that the sun sets, right? The way that the rain falls and waters the grass, the way that God takes care of the earth is a sign then of his very character as well. What does Jesus say? Don't worry about tomorrow, right? Why? Right, and if he's taking care of the lilies of the field, he's going to take care of you. If he's taking care of the birds in the sky, he's going to take care of you. And so like this control, this divine nature of God that exists in the world is then consistent then with the law itself. And it kind of flows through that. Yeah. Not necessarily. I mean, I think in that context, he would be referring to that, but. Yeah.
All of those laws of nature speak to the very things that he talked about in verse 6.
Yeah.
You know, the fact that they are perfect. The sun comes up every day. We've got calendars, almanacs, everything that will tell you what time it's going to come up tomorrow. Right? That's perfection. That's consistency. The testimony of the law is sure, making wise the simple. I don't have to be a PhD to recognize. I don't have to have one to recognize that, you know, God sent me to the world.
Yeah.
I don't have to have this immense understanding. All I have to see is the simple things that have been laid out for me to understand that God is the one that put everything in motion. And that converts my soul to Him. So, I mean, to me, there's an argument.
No, I mean, that's fair. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. I think when you talk about the pact is steadfast, I mean, I guess you can make the same arguments, right, for all the way through that about what he's saying. Precepts, commands, all those things are inherent. And that's kind of the point, right? That the very things that he has legislated officially through Moses and through the Torah are the very same things that are legislated through the very nature of the world that he created. Yeah, no, certainly. Yeah, it's fine. I didn't take it that way. But I think you're right, because I think whether it is specifically law or general law, natural law, if you want to use that term, I think it still speaks to that correlation between that and the way that the world is created, and all those things. And then, of course, we can look at like Psalm 104, right? Bless the Lord, O my soul, O Lord my God, you are very great. You are clothed with splendor and majesty, covering yourself with light as with a garment, stretching out the heavens like a tent. He lays the beams of the chambers on the waters. He makes the clouds his chariot. He rides on the wings of the wind. He makes his messengers winds, his ministers a flaming fire. He set the earth on its foundations so that it should never be moved. Goes on, right? The whole psalm there is a beautiful psalm about God's nature and the creation speaking to that. And there's lots of images like that throughout the Bible. Go read Psalm 104 tonight. It's beautiful language there, speaking to those very things. And that leads us to this more specific conversation about the divine nature of God. So what other sorts of images? So one of the ones that sticks out to me, and then I'll ask you all for the ones that you think of. One of the images that I always think of, like inherent in creation, that is used throughout the Bible as an image of God, is the use of light and dark, right? It's primary. Like we all understand the contrast between light and dark. Light is bright, it's good, it's wonderful, you could see. Dark is scary, it's bad, you don't know what's there, right? Bad things happen in the dark, good things happen in the light. I mean, generally speaking, right? John 1, sorry, that's a different part. But anyway, verse 4, John 1:4. In him was life, and the life was the light of men, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness is not overcome it, right? This idea of light shining forth and exposing things. And that's, of course, then is used throughout John. It's used the epistles of John. It's used throughout the Bible, this idea of light and dark. And it shows and demonstrates something about the nature of God, right? The light drives out the darkness the way that God drives out sin and those sorts of things. I mean, there's all sorts of metaphors you can draw from that. So what other sorts of things, biblical examples can you think of? You don't have to give me a Bible reference. But what other sorts of images from nature do you think speak to God's character, his divine nature? I keep getting him confused. Yeah, divine nature, not eternal power, divine nature. Light, dark. Yeah. Yeah, all of creation and all that was made is good. And a testament to God's goodness, right? Yeah. 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 Yeah, and we've talked about that a couple times. The expanses of the heavens, right? The vastness of the skies and all these things. The size of God compared to us. You know, I do think that Earth speaks to the nature of God that way. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and they're used throughout the Bible in different ways, right? God uses those things as tools of judgment, punishment, the result of sin, right? And we have to kind of recognize that to some extent when a natural disaster strikes. Maybe our first temptation is to think, well, what did they do wrong to deserve that? Or what did we learn? And that's maybe not the time to think in those terms, but it is broadly, generally speaking, the result of sin that those things exist. It is a sin-filled world that causes those sorts of things. And so there is this power to the wind. There's this power to fire. There's this power to the things that are natural that God has created. And in some ways, way more powerful than even the destructive forces that we've come up with, right? Megan watched a thing about the tsunami from a few years ago, and it's like this unbelievably horrifying sort of story. The water coming in through a city, and there's nothing you can do. You can't hide in a house because the water's coming in the house and you drown. You can't go out of the house because the water will wash you away. There's stories of people who just disappear, and they had no idea it was coming, right? Didn't even know. Like, you get these natural disasters, these weather sort of patterns. But on the flip side, we also have like a beautiful spring rain that results in a little bit of coolness in the air for us, right? I think we might, unfortunately, be past that. But we get the sunrise and the warmth of the sun, and the brightness, right? We get green in the summer, and we get, brown, like the seasons themselves and all those things, I think, speak to God. Yeah. 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 Yeah, the power over weather and all those things. We use the image of the rock, right? Talks about that quite a bit. In fact, I've got a sermon on that. Maybe I'll dig out sometime about a different way that the rock is used. Rock of foundation, right? The chief cornerstone, the rock of stumbling, right? Some of the analogies are used in multiple ways, but they all are there to speak to something about the character of God inherent. You think about like mountains and valleys. Again, another sermon I've done before. Like the difference of the contrast in the Bible of what happens in the mountains versus what happens in the valleys, right? You get like the Valley of Achor versus like Mount Zion, right? Like the contrast of like the good things up high on the mountaintops and the bad things down in the valleys. Valleys are dangerous, right? That's where you don't want to be if there's a battle. You want to be up on the mountain shooting down at the people in the valley, right? There's like these kind of metaphors inherent that speak to God in some way. We talk about fire, vine and branches. We see that quite a bit. Jesus uses that sort of imagery to speak and to give these lessons about God. You think about the parables of Jesus in general, whether it's the parable of the sower or whatever it is. These things then elicit these lessons about the character of God. It's embedded in the world that he created. The wind itself, right? God talks a lot about wind or breath, spirit, movement, all those sorts of things. We talked about water a little bit earlier in a different context, but I mean, that's a huge one, right? Life-giving water, the way that it sustains life in existence, the way that it is bountiful. Like, what do you think of when you think of a desert? Think of deserted, right? Because it's dry. There's not much there. You can't live in a desert. There's no water. You think of like a rainforest, you think teeming with life because there's water everywhere. Like it becomes this image of life. And Jesus uses that as well, right? With the woman at the well, like living water, never thirst again. Like there's these images and these things in nature that speak to God's nature, that speak to his character and who he is. The rainbow, right? A very sign from God about what has happened and what will inevitably happen again and not happen again, right? Like it is a sign from God himself that we see that speaks to who God is. Yeah. Yeah. Hungry and thirsty, right? Become metaphors inherent for everything, right? Eating. I mean, you just look, just read through the prophets, read through the Psalms. Look at all the metaphors that are used. They're all fundamental to the human experience. I mean, even stuff like the Psalm 19, the bridegroom coming out of his tent, right? Like there are things that we understand, even if it's not necessarily the terms that we would use, they're there. And they speak and provide these lessons about the character of God. And so you go back to Romans 1, and what's Paul's point? You've got no excuse. All of creation speaks to God's eternal power and his divine nature. And so, yeah, God may be invisible, but he's been clearly seen, is his point, right? Any thoughts, comments before we move on? I wanted to read Isaiah 40. Because Isaiah as well speaks to the way the creation itself speaks of the deity of God. And as we read it, I want you to pay particular attention to the sustenance that God gives to those who wait on him, right? The sustaining kind of nature of God. It shows his power of the designer and the way that he kind of sustains for the world. Isaiah 40, verse 21. Do you not know? Do you not hear? Has it not been told to you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to dwell in, who brings princes to nothing and makes the rulers of the earth as emptiness. Scarcely are they planted, scarcely sown, scarcely has their stem taken root in the earth when he blows on them and they wither, and the tempest carries them off like stubble. To whom then will you compare me, that I should be like him, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes on high and see who created these. He who brings out their host by number, calling them all by name, by the greatness of his might, and because he is strong in power, not one is missing. Why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God? Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might, he increases strength. Even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Like God, the creator of all these things, in what direction does he turn his power? What is Isaiah saying? Who does he humble? The princes of the earth. And who does he lift up? Those that wait on him. It isn't about mighty. It isn't about strength. It isn't about those sorts of things, right? It's about your connection to the Creator God. And he's specifically looking to turn his power on behalf of those who wait on him. That's who he is. And all that is inherent in the way that he has created the world and the way that he operates and the things that he asks of us. And so he's there, right? Unseen and yet seen, right? Unheard and yet speaking constantly. And in all of it, there's a lesson about his eternal power and his divine nature. The sun's going to rise in the morning, right? There's only one thing that's going to stop it. That's if God decides to return, right? But that's it. I mean, the sun's rising. We know it is. Have you ever gone to bed and thought, man, I really hope that the sun rises tomorrow, that tomorrow actually comes, that the world keeps spinning. Like we take those things for granted. We worry about a lot of stuff. Worry about a car accident, like bad things happening. We worry about our jobs, whatever. But we don't worry about the things that God has embedded in nature because they are a sign of his eternal power. And here's the thing that I want to finish on. I believe in being good stewards of the earth. I think that the initial role that God gave man to tend and keep the earth, I think that still has merit and value for us to pay attention to. But I also think that it's a little bit arrogant to assume that we are going to destroy God's creation. That the sun is just going to burn out all of a sudden. That the earth is going to be destroyed based on what we have done. It's not the way that it works. And in fact, this threat of global warming or the earth ending or all this stuff, this propaganda that was pushed on me as a kid, like I look at my peers, and do you know what it's left the world with? Fear and a lack of hope. People my age are obsessed with the 90s. They're obsessed with what's retro, with what's old, because that's the only thing that provides them comfort. Because every movie that we've seen since we've become teenagers has had the world ending. The future is horrible, right? Like that's the one thing that I've been told my whole life. The world is going to end and nature's bad. And then you end up with children like pleading before the UN because they think that the world's being ripped away from them. Because this poor girl has been lied to her whole life to believe that. Because it is a direct assault on the eternal power of God. Whether they are smart enough to realize that's what they're doing or not. It is an attack on God and his nature and his character. And so, yeah, we have to find a way to say that the world is going to end. That the sun isn't going to rise. Because we have to rob people of their belief in God. As opposed to acknowledging that he is in control. And the earth is his. And the stars are his. And the trees are his. And the fire is his. And the lightning is his. And it's all his. Because if you acknowledge that it's all his, then you have to listen to the words that he speaks to us. And if you have to listen to the words that he speaks to us, you have to learn about his character. And if you have to learn about his character, you're going to be like him. There's a lot of people who can't think of anything worse than being like God because they're foolish and lost sight of God's power and his character, his love and his mercy. But they hate it. Anyway, a little bit of a tirade. Apologize for that. But all that's to say, it goes both ways, right? As much as we look at these things and see them as this testament to God's nature, then we also have to recognize that that then becomes a battleground for people who want to deny the existence of God. And I think that that's worth noting as well. Any final thoughts, comments, questions as we finish up? All right. Well, I appreciate your attention and contributions tonight. Next week, I think we're talking about evidences from the nature of mankind. So.